The smiling doctor's name was Josef Mengele, a man who turned medicine into an instrument of torture. He removed organs without anesthesia, performed amputations, and murdered children.
He declared, very sarcastically laughing, "Too bad, she's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live."
Eva Moses Kor was sent to Auschwitz, one of the most horrific Nazi death camps, in 1944 together with her family. She and her sister Miriam were twins, and it was precisely this fact that saved them from immediate death. The girls were torn away from their mother by force to be used in experiments. This was the last time Eva ever saw her parents and her 2 older sisters. They were sent to the gas chamber, where they were murdered.
As we were holding on to mother, a Nazi was running, yelling in German, "Twins, twins." We did not volunteer any information. He noticed us. We were dressed alike, we looked very much alike, and he demanded to know from my mother if we were twins. And my mother didn't know what to say. She asked if that was good, and the Nazi said yes, and my mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother in one direction. We were pulled in the opposite direction. We were crying. She was crying.
Mengele had a special attitude toward twins. He came to them with candy, took them for rides around the camp in his car, and called them his experimental rabbits. However, he did this not out of kindness, but deliberately, so they would not be afraid of him when he took them to the operating tables.
I remember blood taken from my neck, and I remember lots of x-rays and being strapped to a table and with a doctor with a scalpel in his hand.
On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, the twins were taken to the blood laboratory where unknown substances were injected into their bodies.
Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, we would be taken to another lab that I call the blood lab. There, they would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, take a lot of blood from my left arm, and give me a minimum of 5 injections into my right arm. The content of those injections, we didn't know then, and I don't know that today either.
After one of these injections, Eva became gravely ill. She developed a high fever. Her arms and legs swelled, and her body was racked with pain. She was convinced that she'd been deliberately infected with something. She never learned what had been injected into her. Her sister Miriam survived, but the consequences of the experiments caught up with her years later. Doctors discovered severe kidney damage and were horrified. After the unknown injections, her kidneys had stopped developing and remained the size of those of a 10-year-old child. According to medical specialists, this was highly likely linked to the experiments in the camp. Miriam died in 1993 from complications of kidney failure. And for twins in Auschwitz, there was no individual fate. If one twin died during experiments, the other was also doomed. They were deliberately killed so that both bodies could be dissected and the damaged organs compared.
My twin sister would have been immediately rushed to Mengele's lab, killed with an injection to the heart.
That is why twins were so valuable to Mengele, as ideal scientific material. He believed that by studying 2 people with identical genetic makeup, it was possible to determine which traits were inherited and which were shaped by the environment. According to his convictions, this knowledge would allow the Nazis to control human reproduction, strengthening desirable traits and eliminating undesirable ones. This was the logic in which Mengele genuinely believed, that the world needed to be cleansed. In his view, entire groups of people had no right to live: Roma, Jews, repressives of so-called inferior races, and people from the developing world. But his views did not stop there. He also believed that people with mental, psychological, and physical disabilities should be subjected to forced sterilization. In his logic, they were ballast, a mistake of nature, and a threat to the future of humanity. And it is important to understand, these ideas were not the personal madness of a single doctor. They grew out of a pseudoscientific theory that, in Nazi Germany, received full state support, a theory known as eugenics. This doctrine originated in Britain. The term itself was coined in the second half of the 19th century by Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. He sought to understand how to combat the degeneration of humanity and studied hereditary traits. For example, Galton claimed that outstanding parents were more likely to produce outstanding children. The idea of ridding society of defects and hereditary diseases seemed appealing to many. Over time, eugenics began to be taught at universities and became part of state policy in various countries. But the theory soon arrived at a disturbing conclusion. In order to accelerate the emergence of ideal people, it was necessary to eliminate harmful genes. This led to laws in the United States restricting marriage and cohabitation for people with certain illnesses and diagnoses. Violations were punishable by imprisonment. But this did not stop anyone. Authorities then moved on to harsher measures, the forced sterilization of people with various deviations. Doctors were empowered to decide whether the children of a particular person would be of use to the state. In those years, approximately 60,000 people were sterilized in the United States alone. Similar programs existed in Canada, France, Japan, Sweden, and other countries. And when the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, they immediately placed eugenics at the service of the regime, transforming it into the ideology of racial hygiene. In addition to forced sterilization, to which hundreds of thousands were subjected between 1934 and 1945, the Nazis moved on to mass murder. The first victims, in 1939, were children with incurable illnesses, including mental disorders. Later, adults were also targeted. By 1941, tens of thousands of people had been killed as a result of these cleansings. At the same time, Josef Mengele, inspired by Nazi ideology, was studying medicine and dreaming of applying it for the benefit of the Reich. Josef Mengele was born in 1911 into the family of a wealthy entrepreneur. He did not want to follow in the steps of his father, who had built a successful agricultural business. Mengele received a medical education and took a job at an institute connected with hereditary biology and racial hygiene. Soon, he became an assistant to a scientist who specialized in twins, genetic anomalies, and hereditary diseases. It was precisely at this time that Mengele developed his terrifying scientific fascination with people who had physical differences. In 1940, Mengele went to war and served as a military doctor. 2 years later, however, he was wounded and declared unfit for further service. During this period, his former mentor became the head of the Institute of Anthropology, Eugenics, and Heredity, and it was he who offered Mengele a position in a concentration camp for the benefit of German science. The Reich's scientists were given clear tasks to develop faster and cheaper methods of sterilization and killing, as well as to search for new medicines and treatments for wounded German soldiers. Mengele was appointed chief physician in one of the subdivisions of Auschwitz. But he did not treat the sick there. Mengele personally inspected newly arrived prisoners and decided who would be allowed to live and work, who would be sent to the gas chamber, and who would be taken for experiments. Almost no one returned alive from those experiments, and escape was impossible. Once, one of the female prisoners attempted to flee. Mengele caught her, grabbed her by the neck, struck her in the face several times, and then threw her to the ground and continued beating her with his boots. The beating was accompanied by screams. "You will burn like all the others. You will die, filthy Jew." After that, Mengele returned to the infirmary and, with a cheerful smile, washed the blood from his hands. But this was only the beginning compared to what happened in his operating room. Medical procedures and experiments were carried out without anesthesia. The future of his subjects did not matter to anyone. They were considered expendable material. One of the clearest examples of how people were reduced to raw material was a case in which Mengele argued with another Auschwitz doctor about whether a child was suffering from tuberculosis. The other doctor insisted the child was not ill. Mengele left and an hour later returned and admitted that he had been wrong. The child indeed did not have tuberculosis. To confirm this, he dissected the child's body. This kind of scientific curiosity knew no limits. Mengele was interested in even the smallest differences between children. Once, he noticed a pair of twin brothers. One could sing beautifully while the other had no voice. In order to determine the cause, Mengele cut out the vocal cords of both boys, solely for the purpose of comparison and study. At first, twins in Auschwitz were treated differently from other prisoners.
I would not be alive today if I hadn't been a twin.
They were not sent to the gas chambers immediately. This was only a temporary reprieve. For most of them, death was still the final outcome. When experiments ended or one twin died, the second was deliberately killed so that both bodies could be dissected and their organs compared. On one occasion, in a single night, Mengele killed 7 pairs of twins by injecting chloroform directly into their hearts. The most horrifying experiment occurred when Mengele decided to create Siamese twins. He sewed 2 brothers together, back to back. After several days of unbearable suffering, both children died from gangrene. Another obsession of Mengele's involved experiments on the eyes, especially in children with different colored irises. According to survivors, he injected and dripped various chemical solutions into their eyes in an attempt to artificially change eye color. After these procedures, the eyes became inflamed, severely swollen, and filled with pus. The children endured excruciating pain and often went completely blind. Many could not survive the consequences of these experiments. After their deaths, Mengele removed the victims' eyes and sent them to Germany for further scientific analysis. The Angel of Death was also interested in other psychological anomalies. In 1944, a Jewish family of musicians from Romania was brought to Auschwitz. Some family members were of average height, while others were little people. The family immediately caught Mengele's attention. They were given separate living quarters and relatively better food, but only because they became subjects of constant experimentation. In search of the cause of abnormalities, blood was taken from them, blood marrow extracted, teeth and hair pulled out. They were exposed to radiation, infected with bacteria, and blinded with special drops. And yet, despite this hell, the family managed to survive. By the time Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet troops, around 180 children were still alive, most of them twins. Out of the thousands who passed through Mengele's experiments, only a handful survived. For all the horrors he committed, he was never held accountable. He managed to escape justice and die a free man. And this is how it happened. In February 1945, when it became clear that Auschwitz would soon be liberated, Josef Mengele fled. He changed into the uniform of an ordinary soldier and, in June, ended up in American captivity. Mengele gave his real name, but he was not arrested. At that time, the full scale of the concentration camp crimes was still unknown, and he did not have the characteristic SS blood type tattoo. A month later, he was released. With the help of friends, Mengele obtained false documents and disappeared. His name was first mentioned at the Nuremberg trials, where witnesses spoke about a terrible doctor from Auschwitz, known as the Angel of Death. However, no active search followed. It was believed that Mengele had died. This version was also supported by his wife, but in reality, he was alive. For some time, he hid in Germany and later escaped to Argentina through the so-called rat lines, secret escape routes used by former Nazis. In Argentina, Mengele lived under false names, worked, ran businesses, and eventually even began using his real name openly again. In Europe, almost no one was looking for him, but only for a time. By the late 1950s, Nazi hunters had proven that Mengele was alive and hiding in South America. Germany issued a warrant for his arrest, but Mengele managed to escape first to Paraguay and then to Brazil. After the abduction of Adolf Eichmann, one of the main architects of the Holocaust and the man responsible for the deportation of millions of Jews to death camps, Mengele realized that he might be next. From that moment on, he went completely underground, constantly moving and living in fear of exposure. Yet, he was never found. Josef Mengele never stood trial and was never punished for his crimes. He died a natural death in 1979 from a stroke while swimming in the ocean in Brazil. He was buried under the name Wolfgang Gerhard. In 1985, based on archival information from Latin American countries, Brazilian authorities exhumed the remains, and in 1992, DNA analysis confirmed his identity. Shortly before his death, he met with his son, who did not see a repentant man, but a convinced Nazi who believed until the end of his life that his actions had been justified. Mengele never repented and never admitted guilt.
This is my father or not, it is really for me against all ethic and moral and human understanding and nature.
Mengele's skeleton had an unusual fate. Brazilian authorities repeatedly tried to send the remains to Germany, but the family consistently refused to accept them, unwilling to associate themselves with such a disturbing relative. As a result, the skeleton ended up at the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Sao Paulo, where it is still being used as a teaching aid for students. Like, subscribe, and see you soon.